you have an interesting take, and one I think our listeners would be curious about. I'm not sure I agree with it, but you seem to believe James Wiseman has higher upside and will be a better player than Evan Mobley. Can you walk us through that?
Okay, you want to bring this in? Okay, because listen,
absolutely.
I've been saying
he's had, by the way, I think everyone can say Wiseman's had a very positive preseason. Good to see him healthy. Good, like you could see a lot of the flashes in preseason. But let's start here. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Well, I'll get Mobley into it too. We can light him on fire at some point. But Wiseman, I've been saying since he got there that he is going to be a future All-Star. I saw enough in glimpses of just what he could do from a movement pattern situation at 7 feet tall. And all we've seen this preseason is him. I mean, he moves down the court from defense to offense incredibly quickly for a guy his size. And that's going to stretch the defense even more when you have a guy like Steph, who you have to be really worried about coming across half court. So, and everything we've seen him hit a couple threes. We're seeing really beautiful touch around the rim. I mean, he has the kind of finishing ability that Looney could only pray for and never achieve or close, and neither can Draymond. So you had two guys who got him a championship last year who were pretty poor finishers around the rim and just couldn't handle, bigger players around. And now you got a guy who ultimately will be an elite finisher. I have no doubt about that based on what we've seen him do so far and how his progression is going to go. And, when you see the way he takes, how seriously he takes the job, he really focuses, when he's in those practices and he's doing even mundane drills, he is doing them as hard as he possibly can. He's listening to the coaches. He's really, he's one of those guys, and those guys generally will develop quick and have a big impact. So I think he's just terrific on both ends.
So the defensive side is the part where my ears perk up, because if he's going to play in the playoffs, he needs to be able to defend. It's centers who can't defend fall out of the rotation by game 3, and that's honestly been the part that still hasn't progressed. He's barely played. So it's not like a red flag or anything for me at this point, but it's like when you're watching him, he still seems very far away on that end. And that is the part of basketball where I would say Evan Mobley is freakishly good for how young he is. So,
okay.
So let's talk about this.
And I think you're talking about playoffs. Luka is going to force a switch. Now Wiseman's got to guard him in space, and how's that going to go? Basically, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way,
just general rotations. I mean, the Warriors played, I don't know, 7 or 8 different defensive coverages in every game, and they're switching between man to zone to various things. You have to be able to kind of process the game at a pretty high speed to be able to play at that level.
Yeah, but remember, his position, generally, there is going to be some notion of around the basket, cutting off angles to the hoop, protecting the rim. So it's a little less complicated sometimes for that position, even though, at some point you're going to be stuck out on the perimeter too and dealing with switches. And I think that he will develop. First of all, he's got probably one of the best tutors of all time in Draymond in his ear, right, the whole time. And that is also happening
for the last week.
Exactly. But when you watch Draymond do that, he I don't know if he ever wants to be a coach, but he knows how to communicate those things. Cause it's I kind of want to pull Draymond aside one day to find out how he became that good as a quarterback on the defensive end. And could you actually teach that? We're going to find that out with Wiseman, because he's a really willing pupil. And so, but that is a question, and this is the embarrassment of riches that the Warriors have, because they have a player in Looney that has already proven time and again that he can handle guards on those switches, for instance, in the playoffs when they try and do that. Yeah. So, they're not, in theory, they're not even have to rely on him this year anyway for the playoffs. But maybe they can, in spot minutes, give him some of that crucial experience, because that's really what it is. Until he sees Dame Lillard, it was too bad that Dame didn't play. We got to see him against, the top guards doing that a little bit. He needs reps against it. He needs to get burned a few times too, to feel that. And so I'm willing to reserve a little bit of judgment on that one until we see, 10 games of it in the regular season, before I say it's not working that well.
So I would say Draymond's innate defensive abilities are probably unteachable, but Looney, I mean, to your point, where Looney was when he was drafted, had no idea that he would become an insane switchable big. And I'm not sure if that was innate. I do feel like that was a lot of it was teachable. So if you were to project that onto James Wiseman, who, like you said, is twice his size,
quicker,
probably could average
longer,
18 points a game just because he's James Wiseman. Yeah, if you give him Looney's defensive capabilities, I would say yes. But also, in watching Mobley, and you probably watch him a lot more than I do think he has a lot of that like Bam Adebayo, Draymond Green level of like, dude, I just know how to play defense versus Wiseman's thing. And so maybe
I was gonna say innate versus teachable is always like one of my favorite conversations, because it does feel like with Mobley, it's just innate.
Yeah, I never feel like you could teach what Draymond can do. That stuff is absurd. Like the Warriors aren't winning a championship today if Draymond's off this team, even though it's funny to make fun of him. But I find that one interesting because you're saying a lot of it is offensive in terms of what Wiseman can do that Mobley can't. As great as Mobley is, it's not like this dude is gonna. I think at Mobley's peak, he's not averaging 20 points, right? Like he's not a focal point of an offensive set or system.
Well, I got in huge trouble last year on Twitter when I had said something about Mobley like not really being a rookie of the year candidate necessarily at the top. I guess I was spoiled a little bit from like Luka coming in as a rookie, being really polished. And I was sort of, I guess in my mind, I kind of had a certain level of offensive ability that I was expecting someone to have. But when I went through the Mobley footage at that point, probably a month and a half, 2 months into the season, I was like, this guy's footwork isn't really great. He doesn't really have much of the jump shot. The ball handling, none of those things were really there. Besides the fact that he is overwhelming defensively, you can't take that away from him. And again, those guys that are that long and that are quick like that, you could be a step and a half behind the rotation that you're supposed to be, and then make up for it, right? And block the shot anyway. That's what's so unfair, I guess, about having, and even Draymond is in that realm as well, a little bit, because he's got long arms. So there's no question that that he's got the impact on defense is severe for Mobley, but I think we all can agree that offense is more important. Like we can maybe argue about like what percentage those break out into. And I don't know if I'm going to compare like the offense of Wiseman to offense of Mobley, I don't think it's close. And then, okay, how much different is Mobley defensively than Wiseman? And does that gap get closed completely because of the value of offense?
And maybe that's where I differ with you on it. Cause for a center, I'm going to say defense is more important than offense. And maybe that's just like the bias of having watched the Warriors continually win with centers who average 4 points a game, but like have defensive value. But I could see your point where Wiseman is more polished offensively, and he could probably average, like when they're both 27, 28 years old, Wiseman's probably averaging more points per game and kind of more of a kind of primary option.